Geometry Dash. One of the most greatest UGC video games ever. With its powerful editor, we have witnessed enormous of excellent levels being created. Just like V3 went, Update 2.2 is revolution. With 2.2 update, enormous of objects, shaders, and triggers were added into the editor, and it's possible for players to enjoy more levels with exquisite visuals and innovative gameplay. However, I think it's time to point out a new issue that may confuse some, especially low-end device players, which is level optimization. Yeah, lagging is a sort of reasonable for a level with fabulous visuals since a lot of objects has to be used to realize that. But what do you mean a level whose deco is awfully simple, but somehow it's just so laggy? Forgive my rudeness, minimum object amount somehow has become an entertaining selling point. In my opinion, even though this level uses as less objects as possible, it doesn't provide a better performance as expected. In other words, object amount is no longer supposed to be the only standard to judge the performance of a level. One primary reason is that a lot of objects or triggers added in 2.2 have the ability to reach more complex goals by only oneself, such as area triggers and particle spawner, while in 2.1 a complex goal is only possibly reached with enormous of objects. Despite I'm not a professional creator, so far in the range of my own knowledge, I already have some conclusion to several fundamental optimization ideas. And if you want to be a low-end friendly creator, I sincerely hope this video helps you out. After all, you cannot always count on players to ask them to update their hardware anytime anyway. Speaking of object reduction, I believe you all may think of Blee, who I personally regard as one of the pioneers of object reduction. While in our instinct, less objects makes performance, sometimes it actually makes sense. And since Blee had led the path of object reduction, we can directly start with the levels he created to look at how does he do. In change of scene, first thing you can discover is that how does Blee deal with layout objects. Usually when we create layouts, we often place them one by one, like holding shift and then drag. But for Blee, he resizes objects as much as he could, and this makes the hitbox look clean. So yeah, the layout actually can be done with less objects with a scale system, but for sure it's less convenient than just holding shift and dragging around. Luckily, more creators have realized that and put themselves into practice. 2.2 update allows us to resize X and Y independently, and we even have warp system. I think it gives a huge space for optimization of 2.1 generic style levels. For example, if we want to create such a structure, in 2.1 we have to place much more, but in 2.2 it's possible to be created with at a minimum of 5 objects. Secondly, certain objects that are warped or resized can be substitutes of certain objects. One representative is 3D design. As all we know, the thickness of a 3D object is 1/3 default unit length, so for a random object, we can resize its X or Y as 0.33, then warp, and tada, you'll get a custom 3D pattern. If you don't care details, just be aggressive, like this, and it's another way to save object cost. Same is applied to glowing design. When it was 2.1 to reach, let me call it flared effect, 4 objects at least are used. In 2.2 it only requires 2. If we need a lot of flare-like deco, this method saves at most 30% of object cost. While there are so many instances to prove how great the resize and warp system is, this requires your creativity and imagination, so it's always possible to discover a simplified substitute for a complex object stack. Object reduction with spawn triggers mainly depended on spawn order and remap system. Spawn order is more convenient to create loops and sometimes it's useful for repetitive works. For example, you can group up triggers for something flash and create a loop, so there are no bonus triggers required. Remap system can be found in the second page of spawn trigger. For example, you have grouped up some triggers and use spawn trigger to ask object A to execute it. You can use remap system to ask object B to execute the same, with setting the group ID of A as original ID and B as new ID. Sometimes you need extra objects for middle ground effects, but if you cannot deal with it better, it could lead to object waste. This gimmick is really a classic one and especially useful if your middle ground looks repetitive at the cost of additional calculation. In my level Easy and Fun, I don't create a complete middle ground, I only create parts of them and make them look as repetitive as possible. When same parts are on the screen, I use collision system to ask it to move forward in instant. This makes a loop and thus they will be looked like moving backward forever. This gimmick is also possible for edge spikes. Despite I'm yet not sure how Geometry Dash stores the information of each object, I bet it's not well to store so many spikes whose attributes are absolutely same. However, one thing I need to point out that this gimmick is based on additional calculation. Less calculation is also significant, I'll discuss later. So when this gimmick is used, you'd better consider the perfect balance point between object amount and calculation cost. And yeah, now you have the fundamental gimmicks to save objects. But just like I said, this is the first step of level optimization and even cannot represent anything. There's still many things we have to consider, so let's move forward to how many things and how they are shown on screen is secondly fundamental to optimization. After shader system was added into 2.2, I think there are few significant things about render to be mentioned. But don't hurry, let's just start from the very basic ones. Well, there are currently so many ways to make objects invisible, such as zero opacity, toggle low, or even black with blended on. However, I'd like to introduce a bug at first, which I personally call lighter as base. All objects are able to set their own colors. There's a special color category called lighter, which is fundamentally a part of brick-like objects. Usually lighter is supposed to be set for detail or secondary color only, but if lighter is set as primary color of an object and is shown on screen, your game will be led to fake death and crash. I suppose that this bug is possible to be considered an important standard to judge whether an object is shown or not. Therefore, once your game is fake dead due to this bug, you have to realize that some of the methods are not really making objects not rendered, which somehow still occupy your rendering resources. But thanks to this bug, we're able to figure out which method is able to stop the game to render it. Giving conclusion directly, toggle off and hide in extra are the only methods to make renders disabled. Yeah, alpha triggers no work. When I want to make an object invisible, I usually put an additional toggle trigger when alpha trigger ends its duration. As for showing up, I usually put a toggle off in very front, and when target objects are asked to shown, I put toggle on and alpha 0 at once right before another alpha trigger with its duration. I think this gimmick is useful for some additional camera effects since they are asked to follow the camera all the time and thus they will always be rendered. So just disable them with toggle off when unnecessary. Shader system is a great invention in 2.2 which is really helpful to improve the visual effects in creating. But it's sad some creators abuse it. I guess shaders abuse may explain that some creators are more absent-minded to technical skills, as if shaders solve everything. Sometimes the occupation of a shader equals to enormous of objects, so I personally be cautious to the use of shaders. When I'm creating, I personally have the habit that placing another shader's triggers to disable all shader effects. For some effects, despite they are said to look like no shaders are applied, it's still active without notice. This additional shader trigger is required to completely disable them. Now we are stepping more forward to optimization. For a computer, the key to optimization is that how to let it calculate in needs. So next, it's time to talk about something of real calculation. Since 2.2 update, I always have a feeling that there are so many calculations to be operated. Area system represents that. Just amazing, area triggers constantly check player position and how to apply effects to each object. If we fail to manage all kinds of calculation at the level, it may weigh the performance down in an unexpected behavior. This is even more obvious for low-end devices. In this section, I'd like to share my understandings to prevent unwanted calculation. LDM acts like toggle off, which prevents objects marked low detail mode be loaded when entering level. In fact, low detail mode also applies to triggers to make them unable to be triggered, Thus, if you mark objects as low detail mode, you should consider that those triggers which control these objects should be marked as well. Despite you disable the objects and they are never rendered, the triggers still operate a necessary calculation. So we say that area system is indeed a convenience in 2.2 update, but it's constant calculation required, even when it's not wanted. For an inappropriate example, this is just like you turn the light on since the room is dark, and then you are outdoors for business, but forget to light on. Constant triggers include, but not limited to, area ones. I suggest touch, count, advanced follow, collision, and so on are all constant triggers. Thus, when they are not wanted, stop trigger plays the role. For example, if several objects are open in an area trigger, you can put a stop trigger to disable the area one when certain objects are out of screen. By the way, if objects are distributed widely but share the same movement, you can divide them into different groups and just duplicate the area trigger to apply the same effect so that you can stop previous area. Stop trigger is also used to prevent from memory leaks. This is already mentioned by Colin in this video about what not to do when creating platformer. Spawn triggers in a loop invoke each other and times being invoked never go back to 0, only stop trigger can do that. Honestly, I have no idea how Optop deals with dynamic objects. The worst method I can imagine is that when a solid object moves, it detects whether players collide with it every game step before it's stated again, whereas the players themselves may hold their own collision logic. This means that the two logics work simultaneously. If it's true, wow. Preventing from this potential situation is simple. I like to separate decoration and solid, so that only decoration is dynamic where a solid is static. When a solid block is a part of deco, you can mark it no touching extra. So that's what I currently want to share. At the beginning, this video is scripted to accuse some prevailing creators that they are awfully absent of optimization opinions since I'm one of the victims. In fact, these optimization gimmicks are not somewhat hard work, it's just at the cost of inconvenience or additional works we're creating. Fortunately, it's not useless. Level optimization is friendly for those slow in-device players who enjoy this wonderful game and community, and I take myself pride in researching optimization methods. If you enjoyed this video, I hope you can leave me a like and repost this video to others. You can also discuss your optimization gimmicks in comments. Thanks for watching and goodbye.